Blackburn. We'll give you a moment to compose yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Judge Kidd, I want to ask you about U.S. versus Rodriguez-Sanchez. You remember that case?
Senator, the name does not ring a bell, but perhaps
Okay.
the facts might.
All right, this was an illegal immigrant from Mexico, and you ordered him released from federal custody pending trial. And he had quite a criminal history. He had a series of charges, including resisting an officer with violence, 2 charges of domestic violence. He was deported by ICE in 2011, and then at some point, he illegally re-entered the country. Now, in deciding to release this illegal alien, you essentially determined that under the Bail Reform Act, he did not pose a danger to the community. Do you think that crimes of domestic violence are serious enough to impose a danger to the community?
To answer that question, Senator, yes, and I don't recall that specific case, but if this were an illegal reentry case, I would note that it's pretty rare that release is granted in those cases, so I imagine I also would have placed him on house arrest or with GPS
he was
monitoring.
on an ICE detainer when you decided to release him. And another consideration for deciding whether to release a criminal defendant pending trial is if they pose a flight risk. And how could you possibly argue that an illegal alien with a criminal record was, and they were going to be deported by ICE, that they were not a flight risk?
Senator, in those cases, the question is whether there are any conditions that I could impose that would mitigate any risk of flight. And again, I don't recall that specific one, but generally, if it's...
Would you like to review that and then submit an answer to me in your questions? Because to me, when we're looking at crime that is committed by illegal entrants into this country, this is something that is of tremendous concern to me. Another one that is of concern to me is the article, and Senator Lee mentioned the article to you that deals with child rape laws. And I've done a lot of work working on children that are being trafficked. And the chairman's done a lot of work dealing with child sexual abuse and exploitative material. But the fact that you were listed as having had conversations that shaped an article about capital child rape laws is of concern to me. One of your statements, and I'm going to quote you on this, is that capital child rape statutes are formed at the nexus of 3 movements: the popular movement to shame, fear, and isolate sex offenders, the feminist movement for harsher punishment of sexual and intrafamilial violence, and the legal and political movement to punish attacks against vulnerable victims with death. So there's a lot in that. So do you think there is currently a popular movement to shame, fear, and isolate sex offenders?
Senator, that was not my statement.
That was not your statement. It's an article you contributed to, and that is the author stating, and I'm quoting that. That was it. So do you agree with that? Do you think that there is a popular movement to shame, to fear, to isolate sex offenders? Do you think sex offenders are criminals? Or do you see them as victims? Do you think that there is a feminist movement that is pushing for harsher penalties and punishments of sexual in intrafamilial violence?
Senator, as a former prosecutor, I prosecuted many cases involving sex offenses, and I believe that those offenses and those people who commit them should be
Let me ask
punished.
you. Okay, let me ask you this. Do you think it's wrong for the article to advocate for harsher punishments for sexual and intrafamilial incest violence?
Do I think that it's wrong to advocate for harsher
Right.
punishment? Senator, as to the particular policy considerations, I would leave to this body. But again, as a former prosecutor, I did seek significant punishments for those who engaged in those offenses.
Okay, why don't you pull your records and let us know how many conversations you had with the author that shaped the contents of the article. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would you like to clarify that, Judge Kidd? Because I understand your name was mentioned in a footnote to an article which you did